Right, hey folks, it's Faz here from Fazlifts, and today I'm going to talk about how there are certain foods which may cause us to eat more, how we can test that hypothesis, and then also what the practical takeaways are for us as the consumer. So firstly, if you like my content, please do like, share, subscribe, and drop me a comment down below. All helps the algorithm. And if you have a question of your own, then put it down in the comments or in the Google Drive form. And all the best questions I will turn into videos like this. All right, so let's crack on. So firstly, we're looking at the food reward hypothesis, and the idea for this video is I'm going to cover what the food reward hypothesis is, define the test parameters, then look at the tests and offer you my closing thoughts with practical hints and practical takeaways. Now, a lot of this work is heavily borrowed from Stephen Guyunet. I will also link his website and his blog down below. And he is an amazing scientist and researcher who's done a lot of work in this area, and he has some very robust conclusions. Now, the basis of this argument is looking at this raging debate we have at the moment regarding sugar and whether that's the enemy or not, etc., and trying to provide some nuance to that and look at what's actually the case. So let's carry on. So firstly, defining the food reward hypothesis. Now, essentially, we eat what we find to be appealing. Now, the same brain machinery that is involved in opiate addictions, like drug addiction, that seems to light up when we have these highly rewarding foods, which are highly calorific, like sugar and fat bombs together. We get the same feeling. Now, foods which are low on the food reward, the consequences, if we're having a lot of these sugar fat bombs and we are raising our level, raising our palate to a higher level, the consequence is that the foods which are lower on the food reward scale, they aren't as appealing. So I often get that with clients who come to me, they go, well, I'm really picky and I don't like eating vegetables. You hear a lot of that. And the reality is they've just ruined their palate by eating so many of these sugar and fat bombs over the course of the years. And you get this a lot with people during lockdown as well. Lockdown, takeaways, takeouts all the time, pizzas, all that kind of stuff, because that's really the only form of entertainment they had. So they did a lot of that, but then you get to the other side, and when you want to actually eat some foods which are going to be more filling and better for you, you just find that you're unable to eat them because your taste buds are ruined. And that is the food reward hypothesis in action. And in really extreme cases, I've heard of people just having a sick feeling or a feeling of dread when even presented with vegetables. So we have reward versus palatability. We no longer want stuff or find stuff appealing, which can actually be relatively good for us and which is highly nutrient dense, low calories, all the types of like unprocessed foods. We move more towards ultra processed foods because that is what we need. And just like that drug addict who needs more of the opiate to get the same effect, that we have that in the same, we have the same sort of machinery going on with us. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that sugar and fat is as addictive as drugs. I would never do that. It's a very serious comparison, and I don't believe in that whatsoever. What I'm saying is that we know from the science that highly palatable foods, they do light up the same brain sensors, the same brain machinery. So there is a parallel. It's just not a very strong one like some people like to make out. So in terms of how we test this, there are a series of tests we can do, around about 7 altogether, and I'm going to run you through those now. So first test is this. If we increase the reward and palatability value of the diet, this should cause fat gain in animals and humans. And we see that to be the case. So we've shown that eating in excess of roughly 7,000 calories across the week results in around about 1 kilo of weight gain. So 7,000 calories is about 1,000 calories per day. We know that 3,500 calories is a pound of fat. So yeah, 7,000 calories is a couple of pounds of fat, so roughly a kilo or so. There are many studies which show that that actually occurs. So human studies have shown that people eat more food at a sitting if the food is higher palatability than if it's lower palatability. I mean, that just makes sense. It's just obvious. Most people are going to eat more of a food which is nice, which they like to eat, which is hyper palatable, which is like pizza and burgers and all that kind of stuff, and sugar and chocolate, not sugar, chocolate, I said it, didn't I? Chocolate and all that kind of, they're going to eat more of that than they would do when it comes to salad and vegetables. It's just the way we're designed, okay? This also appears to be true if the food is sweetened by artificial means, all right? So second thing is, decreasing the reward palatability of a diet should cause fat loss in animals and humans that carry excess fat. So that's the second test. So we found this to be the case. There was a study done here where those that were fed through a straw dramatically underconsumed calories. So they just gained no pleasure from the act of food consumption. They weren't really getting the taste, weren't really much of it. They weren't getting the crunch. They weren't getting that satisfaction. And so they ended up eating less. We also have here the next study, influence of monotonous food on body weight in humans. And this was to do with the sameness of your food. So for those of you out there who like hate meal plans, they go, meal plans are the devil, like they're going to cause you to have eating disorder. Like, think again, actually, in a medicinal setting, and as long as you're not predisposed to that, actually monotonous food intake can be a very good tool to calm down the appetite and calm down the cravings and make you eat less. So all of this is consistent with our hypothesis so far that if we decrease the reward, we decrease the palatability of the diet, we should cause fat loss. Next thing is, we should have an individual sensitivity to food reward to predict future fat gain. Basically what that's meaning is, if we have put ourselves in a situation where we have been subsiding on high palatability foods for a long time, then what would happen is we would want more of those and we would then gain weight. It would predict gaining weight in the future. So here, for example, the first study we've got here is exposure to high satiety foods predicts increased weight gain later in life. So that means a heightened reward sensitivity predicts weight gain. So essentially what we're saying is, if early on in your life you were used to eating lots of cakes, chocolates, pizza, burgers, all that kind of stuff, it means you're more likely to gain weight later in life because you have that palatability, that increased palatability. And at some point, perhaps through age, through lack of activity or whatever, it's going to catch up on you. So this is consistent with other findings as well. These studies indicate that heightened food reward sensitivity, so when your palate is really dull and you need those sugar fat bombs to actually feel something, they cause a pre-existing state that predisposes you to fat gain over time in susceptible people. Not in everyone, but in susceptible people. Next thing is, the brain circuitry that controls motivational and hedonic processing should interact with circuits that control food intake and body fatness. So reward, hedonic, and homeostatic systems are a tightly coupled CNS circuit, suggesting that they may reciprocally influence one another. Indeed, it's well established that homeostasis centers influence reward and palatability circuits, and this is evident in the fact that food tastes better when you're hungry than when you're full. So essentially, our ability to taste food and process food, it changes based on our levels of motivation. So that is also another point which is congruent, and it satisfies our criteria. Like, all these interactions are all pointing to the idea that yes, those high palatability foods actually do make us want more, and they actually taste better. So the manipulation of reward and hedonic circuits in the brain, like i.e. by lesion, drugs, or genetic manipulation, should impact food intake and body fatness. So yes, possibly the biggest sort of justification for this point is that the most effective drugs on the market for fat loss tend to target the reward areas of the brain. Basically, things like Contrave and rimonabant, those are two of the best drugs in this regard. And what they do is they directly target the reward areas of the brain. So again, backing up that point that food palatability is directly linked to the same machinery that is related to opiate addiction. So drugs that activate certain dopamine receptors can cause compulsive overeating of palatable foods and weight gain. So possibly the best example of this is cannabis. So the munchies, right? So cannabis is another one of those compounds which does affect dopamine receptors in the brain. And for a lot of people, perhaps those who are predisposed to overeating, it gives them the munchies. So if that's you, then you probably are predisposed to this type of food reward circuitry in your brain. And at some point, if it hasn't already, it's probably going to have an effect on your body weight. So genetic differences that influence reward and or hedonic circuits should correlate with differences in body fatness. So essentially what we're saying is here that if you are predisposed to these things, then they should correlate with your level of body fatness either now or later in life. So findings support the hypothesis that reward and hedonic circuits in the CNS influence body fatness, and that the pre-existing characteristics of these circuits can explain differences in the reward, the response to a rewarding stimulus, and differences in body fatness in the general population. Essentially what that's saying is, for some people, they are far more susceptible to going, ooh, I want that piece of chocolate. And they get far more out of it mentally, and they crave for it far more. So none of what I'm saying so far affects calories in versus calories out at all. That still applies. All we're saying is that for some people, this is tremendously more of an impact than for others. Next and final one, on a cultural level, obesity prevalence should track with changes in the reward palatability value of prevailing diet patterns. So if we look here, the obesity epidemic in the UK and US has followed increased fast food consumption in the last 50 years. Now, I just want to say at this point, people have tried to say that it's followed sugar consumption. It's not. Sugar consumption has been going down, actually. Fat consumption has been going up. We know that the level of sugar and fat in total are higher now over the last 50 years rather than where they previously were. So some of the trends that we've seen over the last 50 years, fast food spending has increased from 2% to 18% of total food spending. So previously, whereas your weekly shop may have been, say, 100 quid, like now you've got to tag on the fact that you're going to go to that McDonald's, you're going to go to X, you're going to go to Y, all that kind of stuff. So soda consumption has increased 250%. So people are consuming that many more just empty calories. Consumption of fresh potatoes decreased by 50%. So people are consuming a lot less fresh produce. Consumption of processed potatoes, has increased by 300%. So less fresh potatoes, far more processed potatoes, and between meal snacks and drinks, particularly processed snacks and soda, have more than doubled. I read a statistic that the average person has something like 8 feedings per day. And if you look at it, most people have about 3 meals a day or 4 meals. So we're having roughly on every day, we're having between 4 to 5 snacks on average for the average person. So that's massive. And odds are most of the time, those snacks are going to be processed or ultra processed snacks, which are going to be high calorie and may well light up those food palatability reward sensors in our brain, leading us to overeat more. So you see how it works. So closing words. We can see that this all makes for a very convincing case that it does appear to be a relevant and true concept for some of us to be paying some serious thought to. All right. So if you are sat there and you think that this describes you, and perhaps you've read some stuff by, I don't know, Fung or Torbs or some crap, which says that, sugar is the enemy, just realize that it's not sugar. It may well, however, be your preponderance, your predisposition to high palatability foods, which are firing off the machinery in your brain, making you want to eat more. Not only more absolutely, but more of those highly processed, ultra processed sugar and fat bombs. So that may be the more nuanced explanation. And it's important to make the distinction because it's not just sugar. It is definitely the combination of both. And it is just that idea of very, very delicious foods, which make you not only want more of that food, but also make you want more food in general, not just now, but later in life. So understand that initially, this is some of my advice now, understand that initially your food reward centers may well be very skewed, and you may even have a physical aversion to less tasty food. So basically less processed food, like more natural food. Just think of the classic Simpsons episode where Homer was choking on broccoli. I also had a client come through who initially had a physical aversion to eating any vegetables. And so I kind of picked that part of him. He's like, I don't like this, I don't like this. We eventually discovered he doesn't like any vegetables. And not just doesn't like them, but he literally feels dread when wanting to eat those. And he literally gets a feeling of sickness when wanting to eat vegetables. So for a guy like that, his food reward, food palatability brain centers are all messed up. At that stage, it pays to really retrain yourself to rely on some of those less processed foods. Rely on some of those foods which don't light up the reward centers in the brain by consistently eating those foods. Now, fasting is a tool which can accelerate this process. It's not necessary, but it's something you can do. Switching to a less processed diet can help. Also, I would say if the difference between your weekday and your weekend is quite large in that respect, so if every weekend it's like, yes, gonna smash the chocolate, gonna smash the popcorn, gonna smash the pizza, gonna smash the kebabs, gonna smash the burgers, right? If that's your weekend, that's your Saturday night, you set yourself up in a very bad situation whereby the entire week seems less attractive because that Saturday night is just lights up those hedonic pleasure centers in the brain. For the average person, that's going to catch up on them. Yeah, particularly for the person who's predisposed to this type of weight gain, that is going to catch up on them at some point. I would say for most people, if there's a massive difference between the weekend and the weekday in terms of what their eating looks like, that is an approach which is doomed to fail. It's an approach which is not going to land you the best type of results as if you were just mostly consistent overall, because then you set yourself up in a situation where you're living for that weekend. You're living for that 5 hours on the weekend, okay? And in comparison, the rest of your week just seems worse. It just seems less attractive. The chicken and rice you eat on a Monday afternoon, directly after your weekend binge, just seems less nice. Whereas if you were just always eating those, as I've explained, as I've made the case for, more than likely, your regular food will taste good. So you're in a situation where you're living for that 5 hours a week, and the rest of the week sucks by comparison. We want to work towards a situation where every day seems nice, where all those foods that you eat on a regular basis, they are more tasty because you don't have this skewed food palatability, food reward brain center, all right? Rather than living for the weekend. So you want every meal you eat during the course of the week to feel good. So I would urge people who have a massive difference between a weekend and a weekday to reconsider the approach and consider that you may actually be making life more difficult for yourself. This idea of have a bit of a treat, have a bit of a snack, it'll do you good, build some variety into your diet. That concept may actually be harming you for those who are very affected. And conversely, what I'll say is for those who preach the lifestyle of, reward, have a break on the weekend, all that kind of stuff, and who don't suffer any ill effects from it, you may not want to take advice from those people. Those people may well be naturally lean, may well be naturally athletic, and their advice may not be appropriate for you. So word of caution there as well for that respect. So just to sort of add a little bit to that. So the cycle that people engage in is to go on a diet and get some results. And then what often happens is they try just a little bit of nice food for a bit of a treat, and that blows up their food reward sensitivity because they do it really soon. So they'll go on a diet Monday and literally by Wednesday, they're just smashing a bunch of pizzas. Like, you just set yourself back. Give it a bit longer. All that's going to do is just cause more cravings, more diet fatigue, and just get on this roller coaster of regain. Avoid that cycle, and it's one of the keys to controlling long-term obesity. So I'll leave you with that. If you have any questions about this, because I imagine this is one of those where it's a bit of a nuanced topic, and there may well be some questions, go ahead and ask in the comments or whatever, and we can discuss it further. But hopefully you found that useful. So all the best, and I will call it there.